Hi friends! If you are tuning into this video, you probably already know that it is my February 2024 wrap-up where I talk about everything that I read in the month of February. To kick things off, unlike the other video, I'm gonna start off pretty much where I left off there, and I'll tell you about the Sarah J Maas books that I read. Editing Alexa here. I wanted to take a minute to film a clip because since I filmed this video, my friend Bethany from Beautifully Bookish Bethany invited me to join her and a couple of other YouTube creators in order to do a Sarah J Maas read-along. She called it the Mass Effect read-along, which I love. We will be reading one Sarah J Maas book a month starting this month, March 2024, all the way through 2025. I think it was September if she has a new release. It's going to be fun. Bethany has all the details on her channel, so I'll link to her video down below. We'll be doing live shows monthly, and I hope you'll join us. Our first book, obviously, is going to be Throne of Glass. I am excited to be able to talk to other people about it, especially given I've started taking notes on all the books while I'm reading them, so it should be really fun, and I hope you'll consider joining us. So we're going to talk about the rereads first because they'll probably be quicker. I continued my Throne of Glass reread, and I listened to Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows, and it was really fun. That's really all I've got to say about this because I have talked about this series so many times. I impulsively decided to do a series reread just because I miss the Throne of Glass world and I love it so much. And, you know, every time I revisit it, I always find something new to love and something new to just comment on or remember or think about. And it's true of this particular occasion as well. And it's just been a good time. And I'm looking forward to continuing on and maybe finally rereading Kingdom of Ash, which, if you have been eagle-eyed and noticed, I've never reread it in full because I've been avoiding the emotional trauma. But this year is probably going to be the year for many reasons, and here's to hoping. But these two installments, excellent. They both feel very much like a gear change, a shift change, or shift in the wind anyway in the series, because certain things get revealed in this one and certain things happen in this one, and together they mean that the trajectory of the series overall shifts completely. So there's that. The other Sarah J Maas book I need to talk about is, of course, the new release. That is House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J Maas. This is the third book in the Crescent City series, and I had a good time reading it. I think part of that was because I was able to sort of buddy read it with Kristen. We were kind of reading it at the same time, so it was fun to sort of react at the same time to certain things. I also was just like, in it. It's been so long since I've had a new Sarah J Maas book to read. Being able to experience her storytelling again and to see her weave this particular tale, which has a lot of moving parts in the way that she did, was really fascinating to me, and I genuinely had a fun time from start to end. You can watch my Crescent City vlog, which was totally unplanned but ended up happening anyway because I apparently had a lot of clips. You can watch that and see more of our reactions, but overall, I thought this was really fun. It definitely cemented a few things for me. Crescent City is not my favorite of her series, but it is very enjoyable. I will say it definitely made me want to reread ACOTAR, so probably going to be doing that after Throne of Glass as well. But yeah, this was a good time. Speaking of rereads and things, so after I finished House of Flame and Shadow, I was kind of like, I don't know what I want to read next. And so I was like, maybe I should just reread something that I know I love. So that's what I did. I picked up XOXO by XOXO, which the first time and only time that I had read it was in 2021 before it came out. And you know what? It was a great choice. This book is about two characters. It's about Jenny and Jae-woo. Jenny is a cello prodigy who is hoping to get into a school in Manhattan eventually, and she ends up meeting Jae-woo on a random night in LA, and they end up hanging out and having a good time, and then he ghosts her. And then Jenny eventually ends up moving to Korea with her mom because they want to be there for her grandmother. And then that's when she finds out that Jae-woo is actually part of this big band known as XOXO, and they also go to school together at a school for the arts in Seoul. And this is sort of their love story, but it's also Jenny's coming of age in a way where she figures out what she really wants to do and how to pursue that. It was a great time. It was a sweet, fun YA contemporary. It has a coming of age story that I loved. It has a whole cast of characters that I loved. It was great to be back in Seoul and to sort of get a sense of the place. I've never been myself, but this book seriously makes me want to go. And of course, I just loved watching Jenny and Jae-woo fall in love and, you know, try to figure things out in the face of the obstacles that stand in their way. It was really adorable. It was such a fun time revisiting, and I may have tabbed it just a teensy bit. This is the Fairy Loot edition, in case you're wondering why the color looks kind of different. However, the other reason I picked that up was because the sequel, the companion novel sequel, was coming out this year, and I was so excited about that because, okay, backstory. When I read this one, obviously I loved a lot of the characters, right? I love Jenny, I love Jae-woo, I love the members of XOXO, but particularly Nathaniel, who had a romance that fell apart with someone named Sori, who becomes Jenny's best friend. I said this in 2021 when I finished reading it the first time and for multiple times after, but I was always like, I would really love it if Nathaniel and Sori got a story, if Nathaniel and Sori get a chance to be together. We have ASAP, which came out this year, and this is about Nathaniel and Sori, and it is so good. Oh my gosh. If you have not read this yet, you don't even need to have read XOXO, although it'll give you a little bit more background on these two, but oh my god, when I tell you, I started this book and I was like, I know I'm gonna enjoy it. I did not expect to get so sucked into it that I finished it in a day, because I was just that, you know, invested in finding out what happened. Anyway, obviously this one is about Sori, who, like I said, is Jenny's best friend. She's been a K-pop trainee all her life, and then she realized recently that that's maybe not what she wants to do, and so she thinks about like which direction she wants her life to take. In the meantime, we also have Nathaniel, who is Jae-woo's fellow band member in XOXO, and he and Sori had this ill-advised relationship back when they were younger. They almost got caught, it was a whole scandal and everything, and so they broke up. But of course, there are still feelings between them, and it's a second chance romance that literally just had me in its grasp from beginning to end. I really enjoyed watching these two and their relationship and seeing how, like, even though they weren't together, it was so clear that they still had very strong feelings towards one another, and watching them have those moments of like angst and swoon was everything. I also really enjoyed seeing Sori come into her own. She didn't really have an idea of what she wanted to do or what she even thought she could do in terms of a career, and just watching her find her way was really, you know, exhilarating. I also really like the aspect of celebrity life. Like, we're still in Seoul in this one, but there's more of a celebrity part to it because now we're really, you know, they're not in school anymore. XOXO has really taken off, and Sori in her own right has become pretty famous modeling and doing some other things as well. And so we get a little bit more of celebrity life in this one, and that in and of itself was such a fun time to read. There's a particular part that I really enjoyed that involves that. But yeah, this was so good. And as you can tell, I tabbed this one a lot because I had a lot of feelings. Okay, I had a lot of feelings. ASAP was so good. Obviously recommend. I actually recommend you read both books. It's so worth it. I said this already, but honestly, I've actually ever ended up writing Sun Story, I would be so down for that. The other thing that I picked up to read after finishing Hofus and feeling like I couldn't really move on was the manga series that I was tackling this month. And unfortunately, I only managed to get through 3 of these big omnibus volumes, which is a total of 9 volumes, which I think is still pretty good. And I do intend to finish it in March. The series is Fushigi Yugi by Yu Watase. This is a series that I've actually been anime exclusive for up until this year. I have only ever watched anime and experienced the story in that way, and I have done that multiple times, and I really enjoy it. This is one of those shoujo isekai anime that feels very formational for me because it was one of the earliest I'd ever watched. Make was the one who introduced it to me, actually. And, you know, it's foundational for me in a lot of ways because some of my favorite anime tropes and manga tropes are in it. So, surprise, surprise, I don't mind returning to it. And you know, I am really having a good time re-experiencing the story in this different format. I really enjoy Yu Watase's art style. I've actually read other Fushigi Yugi series that she's done. Well, there's only one complete series, and there's one with 1 volume in it. I really enjoy that a lot, and I like seeing the characters that I love so much and the story that I've loved so much come to life here. Is it a perfect story? Some parts of it make me feel like... Anyway, the basic story of Fushigi Yugi, if you've never heard of it, is that this young woman, Miyaka Yuki, is this ordinary student who is studying to get into a prestigious high school, and one day she and her friend Yui get sucked into a book called The Universe of the Four Gods. Once they're there, they find out that there is the possibility that one of them, Miyaka finds out anyway, that she is the priestess of Suzaku, and she must summon Suzaku in order to help the people in the land that she's the priestess of. And in order to do that, she has to have the 7 celestial warriors by her side, and this guy, Tamahome, is one of them. That's a very bare bones description of the story. There's a lot going on in it otherwise. I'm really enjoying revisiting this story. It's not a perfect one, but it is one that means a lot to me, and so just having the experience of it all over again with all its ups and downs and the funny parts and the swoony parts and the sad parts is everything to me. I really like getting more background when it comes to Miyaka and Yui's relationship, and it's also really even more clear on these pages, like the way that Miyaka's experience in the universe of the Four Gods is very different from Yui's experience in the universe of the Four Gods. It's an interesting juxtaposition, is what I'm gonna say. I have 3 more volumes to go with this one, and I fully intend to read them in March. But it's been a good time, and I'm glad I finally picked up these omnibus editions to read. I will say the one thing I am not enjoying about these omnibus editions is that they're really unwieldy if I'm carrying them with me on a commute. Like, they're kind of hard to read because I can't hold them in one hand. I really have to use both. And, you know, that doesn't leave me a free hand to hold any of the handholds in some way. But other than that, been a great time. For family book club, we read The 5 Love Languages, which is a book I read ages ago when I was still living in the Philippines. And, you know, it was a really interesting experience reading this nonfiction book again. It really solidified my understanding of the 5 love languages. I still remembered all of them, but it was nice to sort of see concrete examples and more detail into them. I also appreciate that it doesn't come across, at least to me, it didn't come across as like an end-all be-all, because even within those love languages there are nuances, and I'm sure there are different ways that we all communicate. The emphasis, however, on how important it is in a relationship, specifically romantic in the book, but I do think it's applicable to any relationship, the emphasis on the importance of knowing how to communicate in your partner's love language, as well as being able to communicate to them what your love language might be so they can communicate better with you. That was really appreciated, and I think it's one of the more practical things you can take away from the book. I'll be curious to see how our family book club discussion goes, just because 2 of us read the version for married couples and 2 of us read the version for singles. It'll be interesting to see if there are really any differences between those 2. I also read this book in a day, which I was not expecting to do, but it was also really good, and that's A False Start by Elsie Silver, which is the 4th book in the Gold Rush Ranch series, the last book, and it was so good. I honestly went into this one not really knowing anything more than, like, I'm gonna enjoy it because it's an Elsie Silver book, right? I should have seen it coming because I love this one. It's tied, or probably really close to being or beating out the other book that I love in the series as my favorite. It was just so good. This is about Nadia, who's Stefan's sister, and she has also gone through some stuff in her past and have been working through it, and she's determined to pursue a life that she wants, and so she has this list of things that she'd like to accomplish and things she'd like to do, etc. And she has this encounter with this mysterious guy at a bar, forgets all about it, and then finds out that the guy was her brother's best friend and the guy who sold the farm that they currently live on to them, and that's Griffin Sinclair. And he's kind of grumpy and reticent, and he has his reasons for, you know, not really being a sociable person and not really interacting. He also has things haunting him from his past as well. When I tell you, like, I was so invested in these 2 from the start. It wasn't only the fact that I wanted their relationship to develop and I wanted to see them fall in love and stay in love and find a way to do that. It was also just because I felt like as individuals they were really doing their best or trying to confront the things that they were so afraid of or so hurt by, the past that shaped them into who they were, and dealing with that constructively. It was a lot that they went through, obviously, and I think this is actually one where you should check out the content warnings before going into it. I was pleasantly surprised by how invested I got in this story. I was like so there for any of their interactions. I think I also really liked that their interactions often ended up being pretty like sassy exchanges in many ways. It's just so good. There is a significant age gap between them. I don't think I mentioned that as well, but that's another thing in case that's also not your cup of tea. But personally for me, I just like seeing Nadia come to terms with what she wanted and needed and to work through her own stuff, and Griffin doing the same as well through the course of this book. And of course, watching them fall in love and seeing all of those things was delightful as well. There's a particular thing that Griffin does for her by the end of the book that I was just like dying over. It was so good. It was so good. And reading this just cemented the fact that the Gold Rush Ranch series is so brilliant. It's so well done, and I highly recommend checking it out. I know her Chestnut Spring series is the one that is getting a lot more buzz, but Gold Rush Ranch, y'all, it was so good. It was so good. You are so missing out if you haven't met these guys. The next series of books I'm going to talk about are actually a trilogy. It's the Three Sisters Island trilogy, which is by Nora Roberts. The books are Dance Upon the Air, Heaven and Earth, and Face the Fire. And these books I had read a long time ago. I think I was like in high school the first time I had read them. They left such a favorable impression on me because they were a combination of romance and sort of witchy paranormal things, which I hadn't encountered much at that time. It felt very novel to me. And revisiting it, I still like certain aspects of it. I was most drawn to the prophecy and the lore and how each of the novels in the series plays out a particular part in it, because there are three sisters, there are three keys to this prophecy and to making sure or ensuring that the future is safe for everyone. The way that Nora Roberts sort of mirrored what the prophecy was saying with some contemporary situations that our characters were facing was interesting to me. I didn't love the romances as much this time around. Actually, that's not true. I thought the romance of the first book was okay. I didn't necessarily love it all the time because I did feel like the hero was a little bit more forceful than I remember. Even though he's overall sweet and has the best intentions, like, he was a little bit forceful for my liking, though I do really like Nell, who is the main character in Dance Upon the Air. I like that she is determined to make a name for herself. She's really brave and headstrong and sort of independent and sassy, and I really like that. Also, she is a cook, and she cooks things that sound super amazing, and I love that. In the second book, we have Ripley, who is the sister of the hero in the first book. And Ripley is definitely more like headstrong and stubborn, and she's like determined to have things go her way. And she has turned her back on all of this witchy stuff for reasons that you find out in the book. Her hero is actually probably my favorite hero of the entire series. He is a bookish sort of professor looking into paranormal things and studies them. And I loved him. There's just something so charming about someone who is like bookish and a little absent-minded, also well-intentioned and like sweet. And it was just, watching their story unfold was surprisingly appealing to me. From what I had remembered before I started rereading the books, I think the third one was my favorite, the first was my second favorite, and the second one was my least favorite. But this time around, this was actually one of the ones I enjoyed more because Ripley has some of her own inner demons to face, and Mac is like the perfect match for her, and just watching them fall in love and then, you know, living out this part of the prophecy was really interesting to me. And then we have Face the Fire, which is about the last heroine. This is Mia, who I love. She lives up alone on the cliffs. She runs her own bookshop cafe. She's just great, honestly. And she's the one who really embraces being a witch and having all that power and just, you know, keeps up with all the traditions and the spells and stuff. This is a second chance romance with someone who she had been in love with as a teenager. His name was Sam, but he broke her heart and left the island, and now he's returned. And I love the second chance romance aspect of this, of course. And this one has a lot of dramatic twists and turns because this is the final part of the prophecy, and if they manage to, you know, overcome it or beat it, then they'll all be safe. And so, of course, the stakes are really high in this one. And I really enjoyed the build-up in this story. I still think the second one might actually be my favorite this time around, but just watching this all come together so conclusively and seeing how this part ends everything and, you know, watching how that all plays out was really the most compelling part of the book for me. I did really like the romance, although I do feel like I might have loved it more when I read it the first time around. This time around, I was kind of like, Sam was sometimes got on my nerves, and so did Mia. So, you know, there's also that. But overall, I think this trilogy is enjoyable, and I'm glad I revisited it. I won't say that it's an all-time favorite, but I do still have that very nostalgic, like, good vibes about it. Unfortunately, the next two books I'm going to talk about were both a little bit of a letdown. Well, kind of a letdown, honestly. First one is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. So, unlike most people, I had read A Dowry of Blood, and I liked it a lot, but it wasn't like a new all-time favorite for me or anything. However, I did really think that Gibson had a way with words, and I like what she did with her storytelling and her lore, and so I was kind of looking forward to seeing that in An Education in Malice, which is connected to that series, but has more of a dark academia setting or an academia setting. This one is inspired by Carmilla. It centers around two individuals. There's Laura and Carmilla. They both go to this exclusive university and take this poetry class with a professor named De La Fontaine. Focuses primarily on these two rivals and their relationship with that professor. I didn't expect this one to be such a character study. I was thinking there would be more academia involved in it and maybe more of the vampire lore involved in it. And there is to some extent, but it really felt more like a reflection of the relationship between these characters, between Professor De La Fontaine, between Carmilla and Laura and all of that. And in some ways that was interesting to me. I mean, I read the whole thing in one sitting because I was just curious to see where things were going to go. But in other ways, it just didn't quite hit the mark. It hit a point, I think, towards the middle where I felt like everything that I've been building up had been done pretty well, pretty decently. And then it finally hit that point, and then at that point it just started dropping off for me. Like my attention was starting to slowly slip away from this book. I don't know. I felt like there was a lot of potential here for certain things, that for more of the academia stuff, for more commentary on this power dynamic or in this relationship. That just didn't feel like it was explored all that much. And then you also have this side thing going on, like a side vampire appearance going on that didn't do much for the story personally, because I felt like that could also have served as a commentary in some ways. There were directions that this could have gone. And since this isn't my story, then maybe that just wasn't the direction the author wanted to take. I think I maybe might have been expecting certain things to happen or certain themes to get more explored, and it just wasn't. And then it also wraps up in a way that feels neat to me for a story like this one, so it didn't live up to my expectations. The other book that I felt this way about is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faizal, which I had an e-galley from NetGalley. I had been looking forward to this one because it's about a group of orphans who run a tea room by day, which turns into a blood room by night that serves vampires, and they wind up getting involved in a heist in an effort to save this tea room that they call their home. You know, generally this one was solid, right? It had a good plot, it had good character bones, and it had an interesting world, and all of those things combined means that overall it was a book that was fine. I would have loved it more if I had felt more deeply for the characters. I didn't think that we got to know them all that well, especially considering we jump from, I think it's like 3 different points of view. We have 3 different points of view that we're following. And even though they were in unique situations and had unique backgrounds, overall I felt like they were more, I can describe them to you more in terms of their physical characteristics and attributes and maybe like their sassy one-liners. It just felt a little bit like we were missing some dressing. Maybe it's the other way around, where we had a lot of dressing, but we were missing a little bit more filling on the inside for these characters. It wasn't an unenjoyable time. Like, I still liked some parts of it, and obviously I was curious to see how the heist was gonna go and how all of these plots would play out, because heist stories or similarly structured tales are always interesting to me because I like seeing how it all comes together. The characters didn't do it for me, and I also didn't feel very strongly about how the plot turned out because a lot of it seemed a little convenient. And while I know that's generally how heists tend to go, I just felt like this one, it was a little too noticeable in some aspects. So unfortunately, even though I had been really looking forward to this one, it was kind of a letdown for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 more books. So the next one is my buddy read with Danica for the month, and we buddy read The Hanging City by Charlie N. Holmberg. The Hanging City was interesting for me because it was a book about trolls, and I haven't read very many of those. The main character is a human, actually. Her name is Lark, and she's been on the run from her abusive father for 7 years. Going to Kagmar, which is the city of trolls, is her only last resort at this point because there's nowhere else for her to go and nobody else is going to take her in, and so she has to make a life for herself there amidst people who think strength is the thing that should be most highly praised. It's an interesting story. I was really drawn in by the world building and the lore because it wasn't quite like anything I'd read before. Even the other story that I can remember with trolls in it, it's not exactly the same. So that part was definitely something I was like, oh, this is clever, and I've never seen it done that way before. What's interesting to me is at the halfway point of this book, I was kind of like, I'm interested to see what happens to these characters, but I don't think I'm that invested. And then like 3/4 of the way through the book, I realized I was actually invested. Like, not to the point where I was super emotional, but enough where I cared what was going to happen to these characters. I've realized too that I tend to prefer my stories to be a little bit more drawn out in many ways, especially with fantasies. I don't know, there's just something about sweeping stories that may take chapters and chapters before we get somewhere that really appeals to me as a reader. However, I do think Holmberg successfully managed to bring this story to life with her words in so few of them, because I was just invested enough to care about what happened to Lark and the people she cares for by the end of the book. It was a unique setup, a unique story, definitely one that I don't think I would have read otherwise, so I'm glad that we ended up having it as our buddy read for the month of February. The next book I read, I actually gave my copy to Danica because I do think she would enjoy it. It's The Warm Hands of Ghost by Catherine Arden. This was an arc that I had gotten from the publisher. I read it specifically because it was by Catherine Arden. Otherwise, I probably would have delayed picking it up because this is historical fiction that has a speculative element, and it's definitely more historical fiction than speculative. It is about two siblings. We have Laura, who has, been discharged from the war and is home in Canada, and she gets a package with her brother's belongings, but she doesn't believe he's dead, and so she ends up back on the front lines in an effort to find out what really happened to him. And then we have Laura's brother, Freddie, who was stuck in a pillbox with an enemy soldier, and he somehow is still alive. I didn't expect to have two narratives to follow when I started this book, so that was something that threw me off at the beginning. And also, again, as someone who doesn't read a lot of historical fiction, it did take me a little while to really get into the narrative, but luckily I also know that Catherine Arden has a way with prose, and so with her storytelling and, giving myself a little grace, I was eventually really drawn into the story and curious to see how it would play out. What I appreciate the most about this one is how Catherine Arden takes gaps in historical events, World War I, and fills them in with some particular speculative element. That is an interesting playground to have when it comes to these things because, if you're done effectively like it was in this book, it can make you consider like, hey, maybe that is something that could have happened. And I like that when it comes to the speculative fiction that I read. While I didn't end up loving this one as much as I do her Winter Night trilogy, I do think it is a solid piece of work. There are things that I could nitpick at, particularly the romantic element. I didn't love that part as much, but overall I thought it was pretty compelling as a read, and I flew through it way faster than I anticipated, given that it is not a genre that I normally reach for. A book that I read on a whim, because I finally finished making my personal TBR dispenser thing. It took me a while. I had fully intended to have it done by the end of January, but I actually just finished it last week. So the first book that popped out when I used it was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which is by Charlie Mackesy. This was actually a gift from Danica. I don't remember which occasion it was from, but it was a gift. And this is something that I had been meaning to pick up for ages, but kept putting off because I was like, I could read this really quick. And I did read it really fast, but I also feel like it was a book that I finally picked up at the right time. Because obviously this one, if you have seen these illustrations before, you'll know that it's a series of adventures with these characters, the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. And what I liked about it was, one, I got to see this author's illustration style and really immerse myself in that. And there are just some pages that I really love in this one. Like, for example, there's this. It's beautiful. There's something about this art style that, while it's not normally something that I would be drawn toward, it just fits the tone of this story really perfectly. I also like the little bits of wisdom and humor that we get in this story. Some of those pages had statements that made me stop and think. Others just made me crack a smile a bit or reminded me of people that I loved in my life. And, it was a treat to experience this the way that it was. I will say that if you have trouble reading, if you are dyslexic maybe, it may be a little difficult because the handwriting is very much the kind that has a lot of character. So I'm not entirely sure how your reading experience would go. It was even a bit of a challenge for me. So there's that to keep in mind, but overall, I'm glad I finally picked this up. I'm glad I finally got the chance to read it. So thank you to my TBR dispenser, a success. And the last book I'm going to talk about is actually a February release. It came out at the end of February on February 27th, and that book is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, which is the first book in the saga of the Unfated. This is Danielle Jensen's latest romantasy series. It is Norse-inspired, if you couldn't already tell. It is about the main character, Freya, who is a shield maiden who has been hiding her ability all her life. She ends up getting discovered and taken to be used as a symbol. She ends up married to him, and she is unfortunately forced to help him unite all of their land under his rulership because she's supposed to be the prophesied shield maiden that will make this come true. She does end up having romantic feelings for his son, which complicates things, of course. This book I actually really enjoyed. I've always enjoyed Danielle L. Jensen's stories because I feel like she just tackles them in a way that makes them unique and stand out. And in this one in particular, what I enjoyed was seeing Freya come into her own. She's not born and bred to be this prophesied shield maiden who knows what she's doing and what she's capable of. She's learning a lot of things along the way, and that means she makes mistakes or sometimes will do impulsive things, and you know, it's a whole learning curve for her, and we get to see that happen throughout the course of this novel, and that was something that I found really compelling to read about. I like that she's really determined to do the right thing. She always has her heart in the right place, and just watching her try to do her best for what she believed in was really, again, compelling. I feel like I'm using that word a lot, but it's true. I like the setting, and I like the setup for the lore in it as well. Obviously, it draws a lot from Norse lore and mythology, but I like the way that Danielle L. Jensen has woven into this story. It just made for something really interesting. And as for the characters, Freya is not the only interesting character. There are a lot of side characters that I found compelling. One of them, of course, is the love interest, Bjorn. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed the banter between these two and the relationship that forms between them. I thought it was really so good. Like, it was slow enough, a slow burn, but not too slow that you were just like dying by the end of the book. It was great. I just like watching that relationship blossom, as well as a few other characters that we meet along the way as well. And with the way this one ends, I'm so curious how the next book is gonna go, because I should have seen that coming, because Danielle Jensen tends to do that when she's writing a series. I feel like she always leaves off in a way that's like satisfying because you finish the arc in the book, but at the same time you know that there's more to come, and that's definitely the case here. I don't think I'm even being very eloquent about this, but suffice to say, Jensen had woven this really compelling, interesting, new series starter of a story that has a cast of characters that I really enjoyed reading about, particularly Freya and her love interest Bjorn, and I am definitely curious how it's going to continue on in the second book. Those are all the books that I read in the month of February. If you have any comments about them or questions about them, feel free to leave a comment below. I promise I will try and get better to responding quicker. And you can find me elsewhere online. All of that information is in the description box. And I'll see you guys with a new video soon. Bye!